You will kneel.
I will what?
On your knees.
Hollywood in the 1960s was drunk on its own ambition. Studios were handing out blank checks like party favors, convinced that if you threw enough money at a production, audiences would show up no matter what. They were wrong. Spectacularly, expensively, embarrassingly wrong. We're talking films that burned through tens of millions of dollars, nearly bankrupted major studios, launched careers into the stratosphere, and then detonated them on the way back down, and, in at least one case, may have literally given its cast cancer. These weren't just flops, they were slow-motion train wrecks that the entire industry watched in horror while somehow continuing to board the next train. And trust me, this is one of those videos worth fighting the algorithm gods for, so drop a comment below and tell us which of these films you've actually seen, because some of them are worth watching just to witness the carnage firsthand. These are the 7 biggest box office flops of the 1960s. Cleopatra.
Good, bad, or indifferent, it had become a film of such caricature and notoriety that I don't think anybody could see the forest for the trees.
Of all the disasters Hollywood produced in the 60s, none came closer to the sheer chaos surrounding Cleopatra. Released in 1963, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, this 20th Century Fox production starred Elizabeth Taylor as the Queen of Egypt and Richard Burton as Mark Antony. Taylor had signed on in 1959, becoming the first Hollywood star ever guaranteed $1 million for a single picture. Her costume budget alone ran nearly $200,000, covering roughly 6 outfits. The film ultimately cost $44 million, which in today's dollars approaches somewhere around $300 million. Everything that could go wrong did. Taylor fell gravely ill during production, first with meningitis and then with pneumonia severe enough to require an emergency tracheotomy. 2 major stars, Peter Finch and Stephen Boyd, left the project entirely. The production moved from London's Pinewood Studios to Rome's Cinecittà Studios, requiring expensive sets to be rebuilt from scratch. After a full year of filming in London, only 12 minutes of usable footage existed, and $6 million had already been spent. The finished film ran over 6 hours and had to be cut nearly in half, leaving it choppy and fragmented. Theater owners charged $5.50 a ticket, nearly triple the going rate, to offset the film's length. Fox was eventually forced to sell off its backlot to developers in what is now Century City. The studio only survived because of The Longest Day, released the same year, and the later Windfall from The Sound of Music. The Fall of the Roman Empire.
You told me once you'd never heard the gods laughing. Listen. Listen carefully.
If the gods were laughing, they knew something Hollywood didn't. The Fall of the Roman Empire landed in 1964, just 12 months after Cleopatra had made ancient world epics feel like a 4-letter word at the box office. Directed by Anthony Mann, it burned through $19 million and came back with a worldwide gross of only $4.8 million. Total net loss, $14.3 million, or roughly $145 million in today's money. The film featured a genuinely impressive cast, including Alec Guinness, Sophia Loren, Christopher Plummer, and Stephen Boyd, and was shot in Ultra Panavision on location in Spain. Its recreation of the ancient Roman Forum covered 55 acres, reportedly the largest outdoor film set ever constructed at that time. Its battle sequence drew on thousands of extras, including over 1,000 cavalry soldiers. Despite all that spectacle, the film was widely considered plotting and overlong. Producer Samuel Bronston was forced into bankruptcy following the film's failure. He had previously shepherded several ambitious epics into theaters, but this one broke him. There's a reasonable argument that audiences simply had their fill of sword and sandal productions after Cleopatra, and that no amount of impressive scenery was going to bring them back. Dr. Doolittle.
You've never seen anything like it in your life.
Enter the wonderful world of Dr. Doolittle.
By 1967, 20th Century Fox was still trying to replicate The Sound of Music, and Dr. Doolittle was their next big swing. Rex Harrison, fresh off Cleopatra, starred as the eccentric veterinarian who could speak to animals. The budget ballooned to $17 million, 3 times the original estimate, and the worldwide gross came in at only $9 million. The estimated inflation-adjusted loss sits at around $102 million. Production was a nightmare from the start. Torrential rains plagued the English village location, and townspeople were so irritated by the production that someone sabotaged a local dam. Over 1,500 live animals were used, costing an average of $750 per week each to house and maintain. Harrison endured being urinated on by sheep and bitten by various uncooperative creatures. A gigantic prop, the great pink sea snail, cost over $65,000 alone. The film received 9 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, and won 2. But critics hated it, word of mouth was poor, and the massive merchandising campaign that flooded record stores with 500,000 soundtrack albums went largely ignored. Fox had bet the studio on yet another epic, and yet again paid a severe price. Candy.
Oh no, this no good.
Candy, a 1968 Italian-French co-production, was a different kind of disaster. Based on Terry Southern's satirical novel, it starred Swedish beauty Ewa Allen as a naive teenage girl pursued by a rotating gallery of leering men played by some of the biggest names in Hollywood. Richard Burton, Marlon Brando, Ringo Starr, Walter Matthau, and James Coburn all took turns in episodic segments that were meant to be satirical but mostly just landed as meandering and hollow. The film cost $3 million and drew in $7.4 million in rentals, which sounds like a profit until you account for distribution costs and the expensive talent involved. Brando played a lecherous spiritual guru. Starr played a Mexican gardener. The casting choices read like a dare. Special effects for the opening and closing sequences were handled by Douglas Trumbull, who was simultaneously working on the visuals for 2001: A Space Odyssey. Despite the provocative marketing campaign, audiences were confused and critics were dismissive. The episodic format gave the film no center of gravity, and its anti-establishment posturing came across as more smug than subversive. It earned its place on the list of the decade's most notable flops. The Chase.
Where is he?
I don't know.
Look,
Come on.
I can pay you. Now, this is all I have now.
Get on home now.
What's the matter? Isn't my money good enough for you?
The Chase arrived in 1966 with an impressive pedigree and left with very little to show for it. Director Arthur Penn, 1 year before Bonnie and Clyde would make him a critical darling, helmed this sprawling Texas drama starring Marlon Brando as a conflicted small-town sheriff. The cast also included Jane Fonda, Robert Redford in an early breakout role, Robert Duvall, and Angie Dickinson. The script came from Lillian Hellman, adapted from a Horton Foote play. The film attempted to reflect the turbulence of mid-1960s America, touching on assassination, racial prejudice, corruption, and mob violence. It was ambitious in scope and provocative in tone. Penn later disowned it, placing blame on director Sam Spiegel for interfering heavily with the final edit and limiting Penn's creative control. The result was a film that felt disjointed and overwrought despite moments of genuine power. It bombed commercially and received harsh critical notices upon release. Over time, some revisionist critics came to see it as an underappreciated document of its era, a film that captured the ugliness of American society before films like Bonnie and Clyde made that ugliness fashionable. Hello, Dolly.
Barbara was very, very young for it.
That's what Patty said. That's what Patty said.
She was just a little too young for it, and she called Arthur Lawrence, and she said, "What do I do? I'm going to do Hello, Dolly," and he went, "Take the money."
Fox returned to the scene of its own crimes in 1969 with Hello, Dolly, a big-budget musical adaptation of the long-running Broadway show. Gene Kelly directed. Barbra Streisand, fresh off Funny Girl, was cast as the middle-aged matchmaking widow Dolly Levy, despite only being 27 years old. The budget exceeded $25 million. Worldwide gross came in at barely over $400,000 on initial release, with rentals eventually reaching $15.2 million, still nowhere near enough to recoup costs. The film was widely seen as a mismatch of star and material, and the lack of chemistry between Streisand and co-star Walter Matthau was apparent on screen. It was overproduced, overlong, and arrived at a moment when audiences were gravitating towards grittier, more politically charged cinema. The Julie Andrews vehicle Star had flopped the previous year under similar circumstances. Hello, Dolly effectively ended Gene Kelly's career as a director of film musicals. It did include one memorable sequence, with Louis Armstrong briefly performing the title song surrounded by red uniformed waiters, but memorable moments could not save a film that fell out of step with its time. Paint Your Wagon.
Why, hell, it's the golden country, untouched and uncontaminated by human hands. It's where people can someday look civilization straight in the eye and spit. And you don't have to please anybody. And you don't have to love thy neighbor. You leave the bastard alone. It's wild, human, and free. And all over this nation, they preach against it every Sunday. But I don't think God's listening. You know why? Because he's here, in glorious California.
Paint Your Wagon closed out the decade with another expensive musical misfire, this one from Paramount. Director Joshua Logan adapted the 1951 Lerner and Loewe Broadway show into a nearly 3-hour Western-tinged spectacle set during the California Gold Rush. The budget reached $20 million. Worldwide gross came back at only $14.5 million. The film featured non-singing actors in its two lead roles. Lee Marvin played a drunken prospector, and Clint Eastwood played a soft-spoken farmer. Neither was known for their vocal abilities, and the film leaned into that as part of its rough-hewn appeal. Marvin's version of I Was Born Under a Wandering Star was actually a surprise novelty hit. Gene Seberg's voice was dubbed entirely by another singer. The production was filmed in the wilderness of Oregon's Cascade Mountains, where a $2.4 million frontier town set was constructed from scratch. It went over schedule and over budget. Logan reportedly clashed constantly with producer Alan J. Lerner. Eastwood later cited his experience on the film as a major motivation for forming his own production company and taking control of his own projects. It was the final film Logan ever directed. The decade of the big-budget Hollywood folly ended, fittingly, with one more. Now it's time to hear from you. Which of these 7 films do you think deserves a second look? And which would you say was the most justified flop? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below.